Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. It is early in the morning in Havre, Montana, where mist and a beautiful orange sunrise greet us to start the day. Boasting a medium-sized yard and located along BNSF's northern Transcon mainline, the railroad is already wide awake at this early hour with trains preparing to leave out of both ends of the yard. Our video today will take us east from Havre out to Minot, North Dakota, a distance of just over 430 miles, covering two BNSF subdivisions that make up a sizable portion of the former Great Northern Transcontinental Mainline. We will begin following the Milk River subdivision, which runs as far east as milepost 278 in Glasgow, Montana. From the division point at Glasgow, the Northern Transcon becomes the Glasgow subdivision for the remaining 278 miles to Minot. The Glasgow subdivision is a particularly interesting and important piece of railroad as it runs through North Dakota's Bakken Oil Field, where crude oil is loaded onto trains to be shipped across the United States. With numerous loading facilities and miles of new track built in the early 21st century to meet the North Dakota oil boom of the 2010s, we'll take a look at this modern piece of railroad infrastructure developed to support the shipment of a singular major commodity. The first train of the morning is a loaded grain train departing Havre Yard heading west. A fresh crew has just boarded this train who will take it over the Highline subdivision to Whitefish via Mariah's Pass. I covered this spectacular territory in my previous video and I've linked to it above if you would like to go check it out. Following the grain loads at Havre West, the crew of a mixed freight train begins to build their consist on the west end yard lead. This will be our last action at the yard in Havre, as we will begin our trek east towards Minot. Only a few miles east of Havre, we catch our next train, ethanol loads heading west out of the Sunrise. The BNSF war bonnet in the second position was a nice addition to this trainload of tanks. The wide-open landscape, accompanied by small rolling hills in the backdrop, is a typical scene along the Milk River Subdivision, as much of this territory shares these characteristics. While often overshadowed by the mountainous regions in the western half of the state, on a beautiful morning like this one, the picturesque nature of eastern Montana cannot be overstated. We followed the ethanol train back to Havre East, where a manifest was waiting to depart to begin its trip to Glasgow. As the rear of the ethanol train slows for a crew change, the EMD-led manifest gets underway. Incorporated in 1893, Havre was founded squarely as a rail town situated along the Great Northern Railroad. The city was founded primarily to serve as a major railroad service center due to its location around the midpoint between Minneapolis and Seattle. In the past 120 years, the railroad calling Havre home has changed multiple times, but its role has not. In addition to a crew change point, Havre still serves as a major fuel stop and the 1,000-mile inspection point for many trains traveling to and from the Midwest and the Pacific Northwest. After grabbing breakfast, it was time to bid farewell to Havre once and for all and continue east. Passing through Lohman and a tied-down westbound grain train, we then arrived in Chinook, where we found a not-so-tied-down westbound grain train. US 2 is the main highway through this part of the state and more or less follows the northern Transcon all the way to Minot. We will be spending a lot of time on this road today. The speed limit on the Milk River subdivision is high, and trains can really get rolling as they traverse the Montana prairies. This light train had no issues doing just that, as BNSF number 9285 leads a track geometry car through Dodson. With parallel road for miles and wide open country, it was time for some high-speed chasing through the grasslands. After a fun chase, the geometry train took the siding at Malta, so we jumped ahead to a rural crossing 5 miles east of town to set up for the opposing train, a long westbound manifest with one BNSF Gevo on the front and another shoving on the back. The Milk River subdivision parallels its namesake, the Milk River, for the entirety of its trip from Havre to Glasgow. The river is a tributary of the Missouri River and flows for 729 miles in Montana and Alberta. In a few more minutes after the long mixed freight train cleared the siding in Malta, the geometry train is once again speeding east towards Glasgow. We'd actually encountered this train for the first time the previous day on Marias Pass before it stopped for the night in Havre, so with this shot, a 24-hour-long chase was concluded. Continuing east, we drive through a national wildlife refuge as we continue our backroad adventures. If it isn't clear yet, a staple scene of this subdivision is a dirt road railroad crossing with no gates, lights, or bells. Just a piece of the surroundings, which is occasionally interrupted by trains like this westbound grain load throttling up after a meet with the geometry car. Despite the relatively flat prairie-like appearance of the Milk River subdivision's profile, it is by no means a flat line. Here at Saco, this grain train is battling a 0.5% uphill grade, which, while not crazy, is certainly making the power work to get these loads up to speed from a stop. In another 15 miles, we arrive at Hinsdale, another small community along the former Great Northern, which, like almost every other town on the BNSF timetable, hosts a siding, a silo, and not much else. The unit train parade continues here as more raw materials are brought from the Midwest to the Pacific Northwest for refinement. This time, it is a loaded crude oil train out of the aforementioned Bakken Oil Fields in North Dakota. This train was likely loaded at one of the facilities we will see later today, and boasts a nice Case Yes ST-78 as part of the consist. While not as frequent as they were during the North Dakota oil boom, which peaked in the early 2010s, crude oil trains are still a staple on the northern Transcon, with at least one passing our cameras heading towards the Pacific Northwest each day we were out trackside. The reason for the decline in traffic resulted from oil prices dropping to a point in 2014 where foreign oil started to become more economical than domestic oil. This happened as a result of the Saudi Arabian oil industry increasing their output and therefore driving the price down. The oil loads would be our last train on the Milk River Subdivision. With a gap in traffic and still 300 miles to cover, we pushed on through Glasgow, finding a coal train tied down in the recrew yard 5 miles east of town. US 2 hugged the northern Transcon for miles, and we eventually caught a westbound bare table reposition train outside of Poplar, Montana, likely heading for one of the ports of the Pacific Northwest. In another 40 or so miles, we arrive in the town of Culbertson, where another westbound mixed freight finds us as it heads towards Glasgow. We now head for our last stop in Montana, Bainville, where we are met by another loaded grain train and a pocket of afternoon thunderstorms. The grain train stopped in the Bainville siding to let Amtrak number 7, the westbound Empire Builder, go around them. Soon, it came around the corner, racing the thunderstorms out of town. With Amtrak in the rearview mirror, we said goodbye to Montana and pushed into North Dakota. Signs that you are entering an area of serious energy production are evident almost immediately after crossing the state line. Less than 10 miles after arriving in the state, we find our first train, which is a local bringing tank cars east. After getting stopped by the local at a crossing, we chase it down as it passes the massive crude oil loading track in Trenton, North Dakota. We'll get a closer look at one of these loadouts later, but it was cool to see this one, as for years I have heard about loaded oil trains that travel east to my home territory, the CSX River Line, that originate at this loadout. This is mile 1 of the journey across 2/3 of the United States for those trains. We set up for a ground-level shot of the local just east of the loadout at milepost 135. The afternoon storms continued to follow us as we moved through Trenton and into Williston. What is incredible about this area is how new all of the development is. Williston's population grew 210% in the years after 2010, increasing from 12,000 to 30,000 people, all as a result of people moving to the area during the North Dakota oil boom. Even looking at the equipment used to extract the oil from the ground, from the derricks to the storage tanks, there is little sign of aging, all serving as a reminder to how new this industry really is here. The Bakken Formation is a rock unit in which oil was discovered in 1951 and is named for the farmer whose land it was discovered on. While it was known that oil was here, it was the application of new drilling techniques and technologies such as hydraulic fracturing and directional drilling which caused a boom of production that peaked in the early 2010s. In the years since, production has slowed down due to global oil prices declining, making foreign oil more favorable instead. The infrastructure remains, however, and drilling continues even if at a smaller scale than just a few years ago. To ship out the oil, loading tracks such as this one in Epping, North Dakota, were built to meet demand. At 2 tracks wide, this 1.6-mile-long loop allows 7,000-foot-long crude oil trains to arrive, pull through the loading facility, and depart in an expedited manner. BNSF number 8257 is currently doing just this at the Epping facility. We actually saw this train 3 days ago in Pasco, Washington, returning empty from the Pacific Northwest. Epping was its final destination, where it is receiving a fresh load to take back out on the rails. Now back out on the main line, we get a look at the other side of the Epping Loop track, where you can see both the head end of number 8257 and the rear DPU in the foreground. And just as this oil train is being loaded, another fresh load of Bakken crude is making its way east through Epping on the double-track main. BNSF undertook numerous double-tracking projects in North Dakota during the oil boom in the early 2010s in order to increase capacity. While I cannot speak for total numbers, I do know that the CSX River line during the peak of the oil train boom could see up to 5 oil trains daily, all originating out of this region of North Dakota. Seeing how as the river line was only one destination for these trains, I can only imagine how busy this stretch of track was every day in the early 2010s, and how much the double tracking was needed. While traffic is much slower now, the capacity remains should it ever pick back up again in the future. That is the beauty of rail infrastructure investment. Railroads can increase capacity once, and it will always be there should it be needed again, given changing market conditions. We were just about to leave when... Another important thing to remember when it comes to capacity in this region is that this line is the northern Transcon mainline, which existed as a busy and important route for a century before Bakken oil production took off. Unlike the Powder River Basin, where all the rail infrastructure was built for coal, oil trains coming out of North Dakota have to contend with grain trains like this one, mixed freight trains, Amtrak's Empire Builder, and most importantly for BNSF, the high-priority intermodal trains heading to and from Seattle and Portland. If a unit train carrying coal or oil is delayed, it is not the end of the world for the railroad, but BNSF absolutely does not want to delay these Z trains, meaning that increasing capacity during the oil train boom was just that much more important. Continuing east through the Bakken region, we find more oil trains stopped and staged, like this one at Wheelock. In the town of Tioga, there is yet another loop track jam-packed with tank cars. open flames and oil derricks serve as a reminder that there is still a ton of drilling happening in this region. East of Tioga, we find our next train. This time, it's a stack train headed all the way through to Seattle. At White Earth, another type of train related to the energy economy of this region, a frac sand train rolls west behind 3 BNSF motors. Continuing towards the eastern edge of the Bakken region, coming up next is one of the high-priority Z trains that I mentioned earlier. This train is either bound for Seattle, Washington, or Portland, Oregon, and carries the highest priority of any freight movement on this line. As the day trackside began to wind down, we left the oil fields behind and approached Minot. We had to make one last stop at Berthold, however, as a BNSD-60M was parked here as part of a local power set. As we pulled in, another Z train was heading west. After getting this BN unit, we drove into Minot for dinner. The train action in Minot is good, and we managed to catch a couple of CPKC trains on their Portal subdivision, which crosses the BNSF at grade in town. But that will be the subject of next week's video. So for now, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this tour of BNSF's Northern Transcon and the Bakken Oil region of North Dakota.